Wesley Cone, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to your talk tomorrow. Can you give us just a little preview of what that's going to be?
Yeah, for sure. So tomorrow, I'm going to be looking at the concept of created to create world building, right? So I'm a world builder. It's what I do as a game designer, but I'm also into authorship and trying to publish and produce kind of this world building endeavor from multiple perspectives.
Wow. So are you a writer first or a game designer, or what are you first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I love Jesus first. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. um no, but in all and to answer your question more specifically, yeah, I don't know that there's a right answer to that question, right? So I was an English teacher for 10 years, but I've been designing games since I was in like fourth grade, right?
Oh,
Like,
wow.
and
Okay.
so for me, it's world building is just a very natural part of how I operate and move and function. And yeah, so whether it's in game design or writing, so I published a game right via Kickstarter back in
Mhm.
2020 called Empyrean Hero the card game, but um it's a scene or two from my first novella, right? And so
Okay.
yeah, and so it's like, oh well, this is kind of an interesting thing because as I'm developing my characters for the game, I'm also like building this world for this book, right? And so
Mm.
they kind of go hand in hand. Yeah.
Wow. So it sounds like it's just kind of this iterative process where you may have an idea that could be a game first or the story.
I can't pin down one side or the other. I know that sounds weird because normally it's like, oh yeah, clearly this is like the thing that
Okay.
got me started was
Yeah.
like the game, right? But
Mhm.
I think it really started with an image, right? So I
Oh,
was
okay.
I was designing the game with my neighbor who had just come to Christ, praise God.
Oh,
But
yeah.
he just he'd been kind of walking through some really hard things, and we were
Mm.
kind of designing this interesting game, but it had no art or anything. But at the same time, kind of the whole time, I have this story in the back of my mind of like these heroes who are going to battle and right they're in training, right, but they've like gained these abilities from right this sense of encounter right that they've had
Mhm.
that they might doesn't necessarily flow with the natural flow of human thought, right? Yeah.
So where are you in the process right now of building out this world?
So I've got Empyrean here, the card game. I funded a game
Mhm.
called The Market, a pocket game. Um, about a year later, and then I had a book that I put out, the novella that I mentioned back this past December. Actually, it got funded. It is currently the audiobook version of that is currently being created. Right, I got a guy by the name of Brian Peterson who's helping me to do the narration and whatnot. As much as I love the sound of my own voice, audio narration is a whole different skill set,
Mm.
right? So there's the breathing and the whatnot. I launched an expansion for the second game. The second game was called The Market, a pocket game. It was a little 18 card pocket game. It's your standard citizens in society just trying to survive and gain a little bit of hope. You haven't had that encounter that with that supernatural source of power that gives those abilities, right? And so you're just trying to survive. And so this expansion that I just ran a Kickstarter for actually fell through. It didn't succeed. I ran about I don't remember exactly how long it was. It was about a month long campaign, roughly. Um, it fell through. I set my goals high, thinking, I'd have a lot of kind of returners and supporters, but it's been a few years. And I think the high goal and some other things kind of set me back some. And so I'm like, okay, well, Lord, we're going to seek you and we're going to kind of readjust here, right, and kind of figure out, okay,
Mhm.
how do I move forward? So, looking at a relaunch here, and next month, hopefully sooner. I'd wanted to do it next week, but I'm not quite on that timeline. So, just working to try to get that thing out there as quickly as possible, so that it's still fresh on people's minds.
Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry to hear about that it didn't get funded. What tips do you have for people trying to navigate Kickstarter? Is it a Kickstarter?
Yeah, yep, it's a Kickstarter. Yeah, Kickstarter's a different world, right? So,
Yeah.
um, you know, people that you know people that I like to point to are going to be like Andrew Lowen, right, from
Mhm.
Deliverance. And then also Edward Taylor King currently has out their Galactic Cruise. I don't know if you've been paying attention to that on Kickstarter, but
I saw that,
these
yeah.
games have, yeah, they've funded massively, right? And I'm pretty sure Andrew has had a hand in encouraging, you know, um, yeah, the Galactic Cruise kind of process, right? And so it's really it's really kind of an interesting thing to watch as they move forward. Essentially, what you're looking at doing is before you go into the Kickstarter, you want to do your audience building ahead of time, right?
Mhm.
You know, you're not going through distribution channels initially. You're not going straight into retail stores. For me, I'm may or may not ever end up in retail stores. That's not necessarily the world that I'm building, so to speak. Pun mildly intended, right? But what I what I'm looking at is this idea of um, a very grassroots kind of oriented approach to things, right? It's and grassroots isn't the right language, but small man approach, I guess, is
Mhm.
probably the better language to use. I don't do a lot of massive marketing. I don't have a lot of funding to throw at it, right? And so it's a lot of just communicating with people, building relationships, and just saying, hey, look, I appreciate you. Do you enjoy these games? And I went out to PlatCon here in Platteville, Wisconsin recently, and was, my games were selling like hotcakes, and so it was
Oh,
amazing. I
nice.
was like, "Wow, this is great!" And then the Kickstarter happened. I was like, "Oh no!" Right. So there was kind of this weird dichotomy of what had happened, but there's this place in running Kickstarters where I look back at the three that I had that were successful and the one that was less successful, and
Mhm.
setting just realistic goals as part of it, setting the right price level, right, the right offer, right. Andrew has a lot to say about creating the right offer, right, that's
Mhm.
important. But then also there's like this place in it where if you don't have that relationship building, if you haven't connected with those relationships kind of going into it, right, it's not gonna move where you want it to. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said there was 3-year time span between, projects, is
Yeah,
that what you
more
said?
or less, yeah, because I
Okay.
funded one in 2020, Empyrean Hero. 2021, I funded the market, and then December 2023, I funded my novella. And somewhere between 2021 and 2023, um, I got hit by life, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's just the
Yeah.
easiest way to put it. We moved, and I changed careers, and I'm a church planner and a pastor, and right, like, so, like, that's those shifts, right, can change things for a person, and modify your circumstances significantly.
So you're a full-time pastor, church planner. Does the world building is more of a hobby at this point?
No, no.
No?
I'd say it's an outflow, right?
Okay.
I mean, the term hobby is not a word that I am a huge fan of, just
Sure.
broadly
Okay.
speaking, right? If I had things kind of really rolling in the direction that I would like to see them moving, and we'll see what happens,
Mhm.
right? Mere Pursuit is the name of my company, right? And so Mere Pursuit is world building, but it's also scholarship, right? It's
Mhm.
C.S. Lewis. One of the things that he did was he built these fictional worlds, and he also did the non-fictional text, and right,
Yep.
his whole idea was connecting with people, and spreading the word and speaking truth into society. But also he really enjoyed the fictional side of things, and it's not a separation. It's not a, oh, here's my ministry and here's my entertainment, right? It's the two are an intentional kind of flow within each other, or kind of intertwined, right?
How long have you been a believer?
Yeah. That's a harder question to answer, right? So I was raised Christian, but that doesn't actually define one's Christianity, and it doesn't
Mhm.
make a person Christian, right? And we all know that,
Sure.
right? So, but
Mhm.
but when I look at Romans, and it says that anyone who believes that God raised Jesus from the dead, right, and declares Jesus Christ as Lord with his mouth will be saved, right? I start trying to look back. Okay, what's the earliest memory I have of really believing this, and saying it, right, walking in a way that was, I'm
Mhm.
going after Christ, right? And I can't think back far enough to know the answer to that. I have some very clear memories of being a really small child, right, and praying alone in my bedroom and talking to God, and right, like, and I always was like, oh, hey, I want to love people and I want to care about them, and right, but so I can't identify like a specific date, right? So going on 30 plus years, probably
Mhm.
middle school and high school, I wrestled with assurance of salvation issues. I think that most new Christians, broadly speaking, or at least those raised in the church, even right,
Mhm.
wrestle with this issue as well, right? Kind of both groups do, and so there's this place of like, I prayed the prayer 1,000 times, right? Prayed the prayer, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the prayer that saves, right? It's the
Right,
prayer
right.
that brings a person into relationship. And so I was praying the
Mhm.
whole time anyway, and it was always very genuine and real as far back as I can remember.
Mm.
Surely there were times where I prayed and it was just words and it wasn't like, you know, but even that gets the best of me on occasion now where I say a prayer and it's like, wait, hold on, let me mean my prayer. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, yeah, and so yeah, I can't name a specific date. I'd say that somewhere in undergrad is where I really started wrestling with the Lord and saying, God,
Mm.
um, I've believed in you for all these years, and I've talked to you, and I've cared, and I've loved you, but um, now I'm wrestling, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So when did your games and your world building turn more spiritual, or were they always have a spiritual bent to them? You
Uh,
said you started making games back in fourth grade.
yeah, started making games back in fourth grade, but I don't think they were ever very spiritual at all until Empyrean Hero.
Okay.
I think that that's probably the crux of the matter. Yeah.
And what does success look like for you with world building now?
So you're asking me to define success for
Yeah,
me,
I mean,
right? Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
coupling with what you do as a pastor and a church planner and stuff. What does
Yeah. So first and foremost, I define success as obedience, right? Like
Mhm.
if I'm not walking in the spirit, what am I doing? Right?
Yeah.
I can't I Jesus said, like, I do what I see my father in heaven doing, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, I want to be like that, right? I'm not like absolutely perfect at it. I don't, I haven't mastered that every single day of my life to date, right? Some days have certainly been better than others, right? But ultimately, my success is in the obedience, right? And so
Mhm.
if the Lord is leading me, hey, yeah, you create this game, or hey, no, don't move in that direction with this book, or in that language, you need to change this language here,
Mhm.
right? uh, that's where the success is. So in terms of where I would like to go as a business and as a ministry, ideally I'd love to see the business and the ministry just absolutely intertwined, moving
Mhm.
forward. I'd love to be pastoring a church and discipling people, but in that place of doing that, right, it's I'm running this business that is theology, it is fiction, it is
Mhm.
encouraging, and it's tied in a way that builds up the people I'm discipling, and I'm teaching them, hey, look, you can do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And but it's not just as a separate business, right? Because I don't like this thing that we do where we separate
Yeah.
business and ministry, right? And
Mhm.
or even business and church per se, right?
Mhm.
I think there's a place, right, where we are where our spiritual principles should inform our business, and our business should then in turn, right, fund our church, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so there's this place where Paul was a tent maker, right? And so there's this place where, as a game designer, I'd love to come alongside other game designers and say, hey, look, this is what the Lord is doing and where He's moving, and what He can teach us through game design, right? But not just
Yeah.
game design, but broadly speaking. And then as I'm mentoring people and discipling them, the people, some of the kind of the key names that come to my mind, like I said, I one of the first guys that I play tested with in Empyrean Hero, he was a neighbor of mine. He was an
Mhm.
atheist when I first met him. He came to Christ, started attending our Bible studies, but he's also developing this game with, well, testing the game with me, right? And so it's like, this is cool because there's this relationship and it's a natural flow of things, and not everybody that goes to church is going to be part of the game design side of
Mhm.
business, but hopefully they will all grow in their theological knowledge and understanding, right? And so what does it look like 20, 30 years from now? I'd love to have a number of games and books out there, but that's fiction. I'd like to have the nonfiction out there. I would like to, be in this place where I've got a church that I'm absolutely invested in and pouring into these people and saying, man, Lord, I see you doing things in these people's lives, and I've seen you do it before, and I want to see you do it again. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just multiply. Right. Yeah.
Mhm. In the Christian Game Developers Conference in our community, we have a lot of students and people that are just coming into game design. And one of the things that we're trying to help them and just answer, like practically, is what does it mean to be a Christian that makes games? Do you
Yeah.
have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's good. What does it mean to be a Christian is, ultimately the core of the question, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a Christ follower. I'm laying down my life and laying down my desires and those things, right? That are of my worldly kind of old self, right? I'm laying down those things daily, and I'm just going after Jesus, right? And so, like, may my games, as with all my art, right, glorify Him, right?
Mhm.
If I'm not glorifying Him, what am I doing, right? It's that same idea of, like, if I'm not walking in His Spirit as I design, right, what are these games that I'm creating if I'm just creating them out of some kind of personal desire to create a game? Like, oh, I really like games. Well, that's cool, but, like, let's do more than liking games, right?
Yeah.
Let's tap into the presence of God and say, God, like, drive me, right? Move
Yeah.
me forward. And I'm not saying that everything in my games is like 100% spirit led. I'm sure
Mhm.
that my humanity certainly worked its way in on occasion, but, like, may I do my very best to connect with the Lord and say, God, like, as I'm creating, let my creations be a reflection of your glory, right?
Mhm.
Not a reflection of just me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And during that creative process, are you praying? Are you like asking for ideas? Are you bouncing your ideas back off of God? And like, what do you think of this? What does that look like?
Yeah, 100% of the time, right? I get caught up in some worship music and something that's going to really set my heart on the Lord, right? And
Mhm.
as I'm, I'll start with kind of book writing, for instance, right? So as I'm writing a book, what I'm doing is I've got the music, I got the prayer, and I'm looking for words, right? When you
Yeah.
write an essay, right? You said there's a lot of students, right? So when you're writing an essay, like, the first line is always the hardest to write, right? But if you watch, there was a movie a while back called Finding Forrester, and one of the things he
Mhm.
says, like, you just got to start writing, like, just start typing, right? And that's really the key. Like, if you just get going and then just let the Spirit of God move you, and in that place, like, I will sit back, I'll close my eyes, I'll just be like, Lord, where am I going next? I'll open my eyes and I'll just keep going, right? And I'm just
Yeah.
putting something out there at first, and then I'm like, okay, now let's clean up this process, and we're going to do some serious editing and modification. Game design's the same for me, right? So I'm taking index cards and a pencil, and I'm just scribbling all over the place, or a giant poster board, or a piece of notebook paper, or something, just something very basic, and I'm just saying, God, like, what are you showing me, like, because the idea will pop into my head, and that's usually
Mm.
what gets me into game design. It's not that I'm like, oh, I want to design a game now, right? It's,
Yeah.
oh, I have this idea for a game. God, is this you, right?
Mm.
Or is this
Mhm.
idea coming from me, right? And I
Yeah.
want to constantly be testing that. I want to test the spirits the same way I would with anything, right? God, is this thing you? And then throughout the process, test the spirits in every little detail, right?
I'm curious, what has God taught you through this process of world building and game design?
Yeah, humility.
Yeah.
I mean, that's every game designer's answer, right?
Yeah.
I've learned humility.
Mhm.
um yeah, I think I think it's given me a deeper appreciation for his creative nature in general, right?
Mm.
Like, he his heart and his passion and his life flow out of him into us, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, as I'm writing, as I'm designing games, and as I'm creating characterizations for artists and saying, hey, look, can you bring this character to life, right? And as I'm writing, creating these things, what I'm looking for in that place is I'm looking for that same life that God has poured into me to pour out into these characters, because ultimately my artwork, my game, my book, whatever it is
Mhm.
a reflection of God. But it's more than a reflection, right? Because what I want to be doing is I want to be calling out to the gamer, or the reader, right? And I want to be saying, look, there is life here, right?
Mhm.
I don't want you to come into my game and feel like you're I don't want you to be bored playing a board game, right? I want something. um I want the very spirit of God to touch a player, right? And I
Mhm.
know that that sounds kind of esoteric or whatever, but there's this idea that when I read a good book, I want it to make me cry, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, or to make me smile or laugh or get excited or something. And like when I play a game, like I want to feel some of those same emotions, right? I want it to feel big. I want it, so like one of the complaints that some people had about Empyrean Hero was that like every character feels overpowered, and I'm like, yeah,
Hmm.
that's good, right? Like I want it that way, right? Like, and if you play the game well, and once you know the game and you haven't played it just once or twice, you start to realize, oh, there's balances and counterbalances for every overpowered everything, right? And but that's after hundreds of play tests with people who've been playing card games professionally, right? And like, so it's in getting their feedback and then fixing and editing, and it's like, God, like as I'm touching into you, right, am I able to learn
Mhm.
the process of growth, right, the way that you're growing me through my game design?
Why do you think the church has an uneasy relationship with games and fantasy and
Yep. So this is where I'm going to diverge a little bit from other game designers. Okay, other Christian game designers specifically, but also game designers broadly speaking. I don't like to touch on magic,
okay.
right? And so
Mhm.
I won't delve into the world of magic. My family doesn't play games with magic, but there are so many games out there that don't need magic for them to be
Yeah.
excellent games, right? Thinking,
Mhm.
here's to Deliverance, here's to Catan, here's to Splendor, here's to Agricola, right? Like tons of games, right?
Mhm.
Awesome, awesome games. Don't need it. And I think that the church in general, I mean, but we're dating back to the time of the Puritans at this point, right? If we want to look at it historically speaking, I mean, the
Mhm.
idea of game and play and even dolls, right, and puppets, right? Like they saw it as witchcraft, and you're like, well, no, let's think a little more creatively about this, right? Because the idea of fiction in and of itself is not witchcraft, right?
Mhm.
More importantly for me is going to be what is the content, right? But I'm also, I'm the product of the contemporary Christian music generation, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
I'm the product of that, right? And you're about the same age, and so like we watched it come on the scene, we watched it hit our culture in really unique ways. We saw churches fighting over it, right? Especially
Mhm.
back in like the early 2000s, and even splitting on occasion, right, over music. And you're like, what's going on? Like, and it's because of the
Mhm.
style, and really like what I've learned is the content matters more than the style, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that the same goes for games. I think the same goes for world building and books and music, right? Like give me some heavy metal, but let it be about Jesus.
Hmm.
Like I know that sounds
Yeah.
crazy,
Yeah.
but
Not at all.
that's really kind of where my focus is at. Let me get some rap and let it be about Christ and laying down your life, and like not about shooting up my neighbors, but about laying down my own life, right? Those are two very different things. I don't want to play games or read books that talk about getting lit. I want them to be about getting lit in the spirit, right? Like absolutely on fire for Jesus. And
Mhm.
and that's got to be where it's at. So yeah, that unsettled thing I think is a thing that can be broken down through relationship, honestly.
Mm. Yeah, can you dig in a little bit more there? Just maybe some words of encouragement for some Christian creators that are experiencing some pushback and friction in their church and stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'd say that as you connect with people, as they see the fruit of the spirit in your life, as they see that you're sold out for Jesus first,
Mhm.
right? Because I don't design games, I don't write books, I don't create various pieces of artwork because I'm that's the thing I care about the most. I care about Jesus the most, right?
Mhm.
And as people start like giving you the pushback on like that process, and I've never seen pushback on a personal level, so I'm trying to kind of address what you're speaking to, right?
Mhm.
um but if you are dealing with like pushback in that way, I'd say like be an excellent Christian, right? First and foremost, and like just show people like you're sold out for Christ, right? And then from there, right, be like, and look, I'm like, here's what I'm creating, and this thing glorifies God, and here's how and why it glorifies the Lord, right? Because
Mhm.
ultimately, if you're looking to reach church people, right, that's what they care about, right? And if they see, oh, well, this is an evangelistic tool, right? If they see, oh, this is an outreach tool, or oh, this is a discipleship tool, or oh, this is a way of building relationships, right? A lot of young adults, what we do is we'll get together on like Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights, Sunday afternoons, and we'll play games, and we take that as a chance to fellowship and connect, and then it leads into deeper conversations, and we're like, oh man, like such great relationship building here, right? And so
Yeah.
if I can show people like it's in this place, right, that's the heart behind what I'm doing, that's how I connect with them, and that's how I am able to start kind of resetting thinking, right? I saw it recently, and I've seen it a few times over the course of the past couple of years, but there's a black man who actually started befriending the KKK. I don't know if you've
Oh,
heard of
right.
this in the
Yeah, I saw
news or
that.
all,
Yeah.
right? But like he had all these people just like completely just give up their robes, and you're just like, how'd you do it? And the only answer he said was like, I built relationship with them, right?
Yeah.
And the reason relationship is so powerful is because God is relationship, right? And he yearns for relationship with us, and so when we build relationship with others, like they're made for it, and so they
Mhm.
respond to it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I find beautiful about games. It just brings down a lot of those walls. It connects people, kind of levels the playing field for people, and gives introverts like me a kind of a distraction to to open up and communicate, and not be the center of attention there. So I
Yeah.
love games. They have superpowers. That's how I talk about them. That they have superpowers to help connect us and stuff. So,
I like it.
um, can you tell me a little bit about the your neighbor coming to faith? Was that
Mm,
through you making games
yeah.
and stuff, and that your relationship with him?
All of the above, right? I
Wow.
mean, it was I was planning my first church in North Carolina, and I pulled in with a moving truck and parked in the handicap parking space, which I should not have done. Um, and I readily admit such things, and repented and took it to the Lord. And also, but I'm walking back out to the truck, and like there's this guy in this wheelchair like rolling over to his apartment, right? Because it's a big old apartment complex, right? And so he's rolling over to his apartment, and he's got like this angry scowl on his face, right? And for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And he goes, hey, could you move the truck? I was like, yeah, I'm sorry about that, right? And I moved the truck, and he was able to do what he needed to do as parking, and he went inside, and he had like the Star Wars t-shirt on, right? um and I used to really enjoy Star Wars a lot. I have questions now, but anyway, this specifically since Disney bought them out. um
Mm.
Sorry, touching controversial topics here. um but ultimately, yeah, watching him, and then like I saw him again a couple days later. He's wearing that Star Wars shirt again. I go, hey, you like Star Wars? He's like, yeah. And I was like, well, I just got Battlefront 2, right, on the PS4. And he was like, oh. I was like, okay. I was like, come over sometime and play. And he kind of looked at me. I was like, no, come on, it'll be fun. He was like, oh, okay, right. And so like he comes over, and he's sitting there, and we played Battlefront 2, right? And we're having a good time.
Mm.
And we'd fend off the stormtroopers as they're attacking us. It was good fun. But one day, like I just had this idea for a game, right? And so I was like, hey, you wanna test this thing? And he's like, sure. And like I'd already started creating the cards and kind of had the idea and put it out there for him. And I think the first game was like a 6-hour game. It was horrible. But he sat there and he played it the entire time, and I was like, oh bro, I don't know what just happened, right? But it was so interesting because in the middle of this relationship building, he stops me, and I believe it was in the middle of one of the card games, and he goes, hey, he goes, what are you doing here? I was like, well, I'm a pastor trying to start a church. I didn't have a team, right? So, right, it was just me, my wife, and my newborn daughter. And I go, and I believe God told us to come here. And he goes, you think you can hear God? I was like, well, yeah, I got the Holy Spirit, and he's my guide, and my he points me forward and leads me. And he encourages me, and he goes, "Huh?" He goes, "Okay." And that was kind of the first conversation, and over time it was, you know, I told him, I was like, we're going to start doing some like Bible studies here hopefully soon, and he said, well, let me know when you're going to do your first one. And I go,
Wow.
really? He goes, yeah. Okay. And so I waited. I said it'll be a few months, but hopefully, we'll be ready to make this thing happen. And um, I had an older gentleman that we met at a market at one point, and he looked at my daughter and goes, "She reminds me of my girls." And he goes, he asked the same question. He said, "What are you guys doing here?" I was like, "This is so weird." I was like, "Well." I said, "Well, we're here to start a church." He's like, "I've been praying for something like that." I'm like, "Whoa!" I was like, "That's so different than the last reaction I got, right?" and and there were hundreds of other interactions similar to this, but these are the two that kind of got us rolling. And so he goes, "Well, when can we meet?" I was like, Thursday." Like, let's just do it, right? And so I texted my neighbor, and he came over, and he would still come over. I mean, every other day or so, every couple of days, and we just play games, whether it was video games or testing the card game or whatever, kind of depending on where we were at in that process. And he, they both came over for the Bible study, and he leaves that night, and he ultimately decides he's going to come back. Oh, cool. And then it was after, I don't remember which meeting it was after. It was either the second, maybe the third. He goes, "I want to believe."
Hmm.
And I go, "Oh." And he goes, and I go, "Well, and at this point I'm just trusting the Holy Spirit, right? Like, because the words are not coming. And so, like, Lord, like, what do I say?" And he goes,
Yeah.
and I said, "The line between belief and unbelief is a very thin line." And I said, if you were rolling, and he's in a wheelchair, so if you're rolling down the sidewalk, right, and you see a guy standing on a street corner, what would you think of him? He was like, "Well, there's a guy standing on a street corner. I don't know." I go, "Okay, what if he's dressed like, in absolutely raggedy clothes, and he's filthy?" And, he said, "Well, I'd assume he was homeless." I say, "Yeah." I said, "What if he was dressed in a really nice fancy business suit?" He goes, "Oh, well, I think he was probably pretty wealthy, maybe a business owner or something." And he goes, "Oh." And I go, "Yeah." I said, "That makes sense." I said, "So, but there's a problem here." He goes, "What?" I said, "Well, what are you doing when you make those assumptions?" And he clicked on really quickly. He's a smart guy. He said, "Well, I'm judging them." I said, "Yeah, you are." I said, "But you never talked to these guys, did you?" He goes, "No." I said, "So how do you get to know them, to know who they really are? What if that guy dressed there in the rags is actually some really wealthy person, in disguise or something, right?" And he said, "Well, I have to talk to them and get to know them." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Here's what people do. They look at God and they judge him from a distance, right? They look
Hmm.
at his people and they say, oh, if that's what God's like, I don't want that, right?"
Yeah.
And they judge God based on that. And he said, "Oh," and I said, "Do you want to talk to him?" He's like, "Yeah, I do." So just jumped right into prayer from there, and from there,
Wow.
like, he grew, and he ended up passing away, um, a year or two later after that. But um, he and that's a long story, but um, I'm just thankful that I got to be a friend, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. Wow. Um, are there other people that have been involved in your uh, playtesting and development journey?
Hundreds.
Yeah.
So many people. Yeah, and honestly, like, the reason the first two games did so well on the Kickstarter was because I was much better at, like, capturing emails and, like,
Oh.
staying connected with people and saying, "Hey, come check
Mhm.
out this game." And, like, and like, they would check in every so often and say, "Hey, how's it coming? Are you
Mhm.
going to be kickstarting anytime soon?" And, this most recent Kickstarter, I did not have that same build up, because a lot of the playtesting had been done, a while back, right? And so
Mm.
then when I came to this Kickstarter, it was like, okay, it's time to go ahead and get rolling with this thing. I did a handful of playtests, which accounted for a handful of backers, right?
Mhm.
But it had already been, play tested, out the wazoo, right? And so, but in terms of people that have been involved in the process, there have been, I mean, gosh, you know Andrew Lowen was one of my first early supporters, right? And he
Okay.
backs everything that I put up right now anyway. I pray that it stays that way, but I never know. But um, Andrew
How'd you
Harmon, I
connect
don't
with
know if
him?
yeah, so through the board game design lab,
Okay.
he had posted, I think it was like his very one of his initial pictures of Deliverance, and I was like, bro, this
Mhm.
guy's he loves Jesus. And so like I hit him up. I created a Facebook group a couple years ago called the Tabletop Marketing Collaborative. I'm not the leader of it anymore. I stepped down. 2021 got to be a lot, right? But 2020, 2021, it was the COVID
Mhm.
crazy, and so I backed up and I was like, I'm gonna take a breather for a little while, but I brought Andrew Lowen and about 4 or 5 other creators and designers on board, and Andrew's marketing background, and I just said, hey guys, like, is this a thing you guys would be interested in doing with me, right? And so we ran that, and we were making daily posts, right, on the group, and just trying to encourage
Mhm.
creators to create, right, and how to do so and how to market effectively, which is kind of ironic considering my most recent Kickstarter. But I don't, um, things have shifted, and so I'm learning and readjusting with the times as well. So um, all of society has kind of changed and is moving differently now. Sorry, I have like
Yeah.
this kid like looking at me through the window, so if I keep looking over, that's kind of what's happening. So um, I'm in a
Mhm.
public library right now, so yeah. But so yeah, that's how I connected with Andrew. Andrew Harmon he's made Portals and Prophets and King of Glory, and he's got a game in the making right now. Parable Kingdom is one of the most epic games I've ever played, in my personal opinion. Um, it's not Deliverance; it's a different game style entirely. It's action selection and um resource management, right? And it's so much fun. So you got to be on the lookout for that. But he's play tested my games, and I play tested his, and feedback. But we also talk theology and the things. There have been other designers out there. Wes Woodbury. I don't know his spiritual background per se, but he produced a game on Kickstarter recently called Forge. It was a spectacular game, but he played tested my games and done some interviews for me. And if Adam the Fanatic, I don't know if you've interacted with him at all,
Not
but
familiar with
he's
him.
a when I ran across him, he was just kind of had a YouTube channel and is kind of reviewing, old video games, right? And
Yeah.
just for fun, and not like a massive following or anything, but he just had a passion, right? And so I connected with him. I was like, hey, look, you need to tap into this board game stuff, and would you be interested in doing a preview video for my upcoming game for Empyrean
Mhm.
Hero? And so I've used him ever since then, and he's kind of launched into his own kind of thing, and he's growing, and but he's just an awesome dude as well, and he's deeply insightful. And if you ever watch him on YouTube, like you can just hear the intellect kind of rolling off of his mind, right?
Mhm.
People. Then there's others like Jack Dunbar and Joe Bragg, right, of Christian Board Gamers, and Jack Dunbar is the New Kingdom games, right?
Mhm.
These guys contribute to the Christian game design space in ways that I think are really beneficial, right? And are much needed, and so it's deeply appreciative. I've been part of the Christian game developer community since way back when, in the tabletop edition, right, on
Yep.
Facebook there, but
Mhm.
also the standard one, and you know, just I would say that I've only named a handful of people, but there are a number of others that just come to mind, but I don't want to keep going. Yeah.
What are some like pros and cons of building out a whole world IP?
Biggest drawback is that you have people that only like certain types of games, right? And so they'll play Empyrean
Mm.
Hero, but when
Okay.
it comes to the market, they're like, nah, like that's not me, right? That's not enough thinking. It lasts 5 to 10 minutes. That's it's not heavy enough, or there's no fighting. Or people that like the market will never play Empyrean Hero because Empyrean Hero is a combat oriented game, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so like that's kind of one of the drawbacks. The pros are much more long term, right? They're not short term wins, right?
Mhm.
In world building, I grew up in a time where things like Marvel and DC, right, were kind of the heroes of yesteryear, right?
Yep. Yep.
Right. Except they weren't they are now, right?
Mhm.
Yesteryear, yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, they were the thing, but it was like if it was a movie, if it was a game, if it was a comic book, if it was a blank, I wanted the thing, right, as a
Yeah.
kid, and I was all into it, and I'm not so much anymore. But at the time, and it's not because I'm not into world building. It's the direction that Marvel and DC have really kind of spun off in the directions
Sure.
of from a
Mhm.
moral perspective, right? And so,
Mhm.
um, there was a time where, yeah, like they kind of touched on some things that were questionable, but now they just like absolutely highlighted it, right? And you're like, oh
Yeah.
man, there's hard things there. Um, but but in that, it's like I want I have a child, I have a little girl, and she's like 8 years old, and like I want her to have a fandom she can grow up in,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I want it to be awesome. I don't want something cheesy and kind of piddly. Like, I want epic,
Yeah.
and I want it to be glorious and like. And I want it to be like God oriented and pointing to Him in the process, right?
Mhm.
Um, there's this idea that Christian media can't be good, um, and I disagree. I think that there has to be a lot of money behind it to make it good. And I think Christians have a hard time saying, "Oh, we're going to invest our dollars in Christian media, right, rather than this other stuff."
Mhm.
And like and I'm not anti like media that's not Christian. I'm also a fan, like Catan and Splendor and Agricola. Like these are good games, um, but specifically, like there's this mindset of like my money like has to necessarily go toward things of ilks that may or may not actually glorify Christ, and some of
Sure.
them actually run contrary to Christ, right? and
Mhm.
and so what is it that we're looking at doing with our money, right?
Mhm.
And how does that build up the kingdom? And like if I want better Christian media, I have to be willing to put my money where my mouth is, right? And that's really just got to be it. Because if you look at Dallas Jenkins' The Chosen, right,
Mhm.
as an example, like spectacular production quality. The Now I realize the content, people are going to argue about on occasion. It is mildly controversial, but it's interesting that it's mildly controversial compared to like some of the other movies that Hollywood specifically has put out, right?
Sure.
Because he
Yeah.
still sticks to the storyline, broadly speaking.
Mhm.
He still sticks to the heart of the gospel, right? And there's something about that it attracts people, and it's connecting with non-Christians and atheists and agnostics. They're like, I couldn't ever see Jesus like this before, right?
Mhm.
But why is that? Well, there's a lot of money in it, right? And so of course it's going to grow and succeed, and like because you can create a production value that's spectacular, but it also helps that it's got like good writers and good story and good filmography, right? Like, or cinematography, right? Like all of these things like all come together into the culmination of good work, right? And can't I do that for my kid on some small level, even if I don't have
Mhm.
all that money? But maybe, just maybe, something will come out of it, and it'll be built up in a way that can add value to a lot of other people too, right? I'm like, if this works for me and my daughter's loving this, right,
Yeah.
surely I can add value to others, right? So that's
Mhm.
kind of the hope there. Yeah.
So you and I are kind of midlife. Do
Yeah.
you um do you see this world that you're building like your life's work, or do you think you'll have other stories in other worlds, or where are you at right
Mm.
now?
My life's work is Jesus.
Sure. Yeah.
I got to give my Christian answers. I'm so sorry. Not actually. Yeah, sort of. Maybe. I don't know. Um, Life's work is an interesting question. I don't know. I want my epitaph to read, here lies Wesley Cone, a man who responded to the Lord,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Whether or not my temporary creations supersede my existence or not,
Mhm.
right? May the impact of the world that I'm building, the nonfiction that I create, the pastoral ministry that I do, the discipleship the time that I invest in people's lives, right? Let that be the mark of who I am as a person, as I am oriented toward Christ, right? Because apart from that, nothing else matters. So if this whole business absolutely were to fall through,
Mhm.
it's okay, right? God is big, right? And I've known people. There was a Christian designer who had a publishing company that he shut down a couple years ago, and actually had a another guy reach out to me during kind of a struggle of what I was wrestling with. He said, I think that you're under some spiritual attack on this one, and you should go after, we really want to see you succeed. And I, it was a friend of mine. He worked with the company that published the Isafarian Guard. Right. And the guy reached out to me, Clint Cabrera reached out and said, hey, here's the thing, we want to see you move forward. I said, well, thank you so much. And like, it's really awesome. Right. But like, ultimately, whether this business moves forward or not, whether my games, have any lasting sustenance or not, I pray that the mark of their impact on people's lives, right, the impact of the game, the impact of the world building, even if it doesn't impact them directly, let what the Lord's done through them and me then turn around and pour into the people around me. Yeah.
That's really good. A lot of creatives kind of struggle with that identity piece, but it sounds like you are firmly rooted in God, and that is your identity first.
It is. It doesn't always help with the dollars perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's been integral to the relationship building and the loving and the changing of lives. I mean, seeing people come to Christ and getting to do baptisms, and not because I'm a pastor, but because I love people. I think anybody can baptize people. I just do. I'm not an ecclesiastical clergy kind of guy. Like, that guy in the robe has to be the one to do a baptism. No, like, go baptize somebody in a bathtub. It'll be all right. Like, obviously with their permission. Yeah. but yeah, like, the game creation process has to flow out of who I am first. In fact, I think it does for all designers. I think every designer's creation is an outflow of what's going on in their heart, right? And you'll hear me talk about that a little bit tomorrow in the world building session. But like, the scripture talks about how, like, the words of your mouth, right, are an overflow of your heart, right?
Yep.
Well, that's because they're an expression of who you are. Your game design is an expression of who you are. Your book writing is an expression of who you are. Your whatever it is, like, it's an expression. And so the question is like, what is it that I'm expressing? Right? What is it I'm putting out there? Is what I'm putting out there just like good? And does it point to the Lord or not? And it doesn't have to be like directly Christian, like Deliverance or The Chosen, but it does need to I want it to be filled with life and hope. Right? Even if it's like a competitive game, right? Like, let the lore behind it be good, right? The lore matters. Let the story building be good, and then let it drive people into relationship with each other, right? I can play I can play a game of Ticket to Ride, right, with 4 people around me and just having a great time and get my butt kicked, right? But just enjoy the company, and then talk strategy after the game's over and be like, oh man, why'd you build that crazy long route over there that went into nowhere, right? And what were you thinking? And then they show their objective cards and you're like, oh man, and like, can I grow from that, right? Can I learn, right? I don't see competitive games the way that some people do, that they're necessarily a negative. I think that iron sharpens iron.
For sure.
And I think that happens in our theological conversations as well, as we press back on each other and say, oh, have you considered this? And I can sometimes be a thorn in people's sides, so to speak, on some of my theological kind of perspectives, right? Because in some ways I'm a little puritanical, right? And you're like, oh, well, but I'm not anti-gaming either, right? And so there's kind of this tug of war of, well, is hip with the times, right? To throw it back to like the 80s and 70s, right? But also he's got like this moral backbone, or moral bent, maybe, if moral backbone sounds kind of self-righteous, a moral bent, right, that rubs against what I'm comfortable with, right? And I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
So where can people find your products?
Yeah. I don't actually sell them online. I run Kickstarter campaigns, and that's typically when I sell things. I did have an online store for a little while, shut it down, trying to work on getting one going again at some point here in the future. I'd say the best key is to connect with me via Facebook. There's a Facebook group called Mere Pursuit,
Mere Pursuit. Okay.
MERE Pursuit, PURSUIT. It's named after Tolkien's Mere Christianity and A.W. Tozer's Pursuit of God, right?
Mhm.
And so Mere Pursuit, and just like we're just going after the Lord. And so in the Facebook group, that's where I drop most of my updates. You could also email me at connect@merepursuit.com and say, hey, can you put me onto your MailChimp list? And I'll drop you on there and you'll get the updates that way. Yeah.
Awesome. And when is your next Kickstarter then? When are you going to relaunch that?
Yeah, so the goal was next week, but that's not happening now. So the ASAP,
Okay.
as they say in The Chosen, soon.
Well, thank you so much, Wesley.
Yeah, Brock, I appreciate you. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for the Christian game developers community. It's a blessing, and I know you're one cog among many, but
Yes.
it's huge, and you work with a lot of people, and so we're super thankful, as designers, and yeah, we just appreciate you.